I'm Frank Ryan. I'm the state representative for the 101st District in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania. And as we continue on the discussion of getting rid of property taxes and eliminating them across the board in the Commonwealth, I kept running into this term called funding formula. And as I initially began working on the Property Tax Elimination bill, I was trying to find out one way, shape, or form why a funding formula would become important to us. And so what it became obvious to me was the way the state allocates money to the various school districts is actually the basis of what we call the funding formula. And in this example, I'm going to use a school district in my own area as an example, which is the Palmyra Area School District. So what's a funding formula? It's a methodology that's used by the state and how it allocates funds from the Commonwealth Department of Education through the budget to the 500 school districts in the Commonwealth. There's a separate basic education formula, and there's also one that's there for special education. And what I found out, and it was pretty fascinating, was that all 500 school districts get something entirely different. And their percentages vary across the board, and it's all based upon this funding formula. But what you need to be aware of is that there are actually two funding formulas. There's one that's historical, and we're going to call that the Hold Harmless Agreement. And then there's the new one that's being called the Basic Education Funding Formula for the new system, and that was enacted by Act 51 of 2014. The results of this commission were incorporated into the Basic Education Funding Formula, and that accounts for how the different school districts, including anyone else in the 500 school districts, get the allocation based upon the school district's current tax efforts, the ability of the district to raise revenue, and it also includes student-based factors such as the number of children in the district who live in poverty, the number of children enrolled in charter schools, the number of children who are English language learners, in other words, English as a second language. And it's also created and unanimously adopted by this bipartisan Basic Education Funding Commission in June 2015. And by having that formula in place, the goal was to have it distributed equitably across the board, so that each individual school received its, what we would call then, the fair share. There's an important operative word in this term, and it's called new funds. And that's what means and what brings up the fact that there are two means of allocating funds. The new funds term means that any new funds that are generated by the Commonwealth will be allocated by this bill, Act 51 of 2014. Unfortunately, there's a hold harmless provision in the bill, and that prevents any school district from receiving less than they would have under the old funding formula, which was developed in the 1970s. While I wasn't in office at that time, it's obvious that the bill of Act 35 of 2016 would never have become law had that hold harmless provision not been put into effect. Act 35, that 2016 report that adopts the language from the Commission, establishes an effort to correct an inequity under the old funding formula. What that basically meant, and to try to really put this in more important terms, is as school districts in the Commonwealth either gained or lost students, and the concept of charter school, poverty rates, English as a second language became more and more prevalent in the Commonwealth that didn't exist earlier, that we would have situations in which the old funding formula and the new funding formula gave significantly different results. As a result of this Act 35 of 2016 with the new funding formula, it created school districts that were perceived as being overfunded, which means that they got more money than they should have if their state allocation were based upon the new funding formula, and underfunded formula, which is a situation in which school districts would get less money from the state than they perhaps should have under the new funding formula. So let me give you a real clear example, because that can be pretty complicated. Palmyra Area School District is one of those. Palmyra, according to the state, is underfunded in the 2019 school year by $1.1 million. In Lebanon County and Dauphin County, approximately 50% of each school district's fundings are in a situation where they are either overfunded or underfunded, with Harrisburg City and Lancaster City being the most underfunded in each county, under the new funding formula. The basic funding formula, which produces $6.6 million in the case of Palmyra, was a situation in which $1.1 million of underfunding for Palmyra as well, just like the cities, must be made up by additional cost controls of the school district or put into the property tax. And that's the tie-in with the property tax elimination. So what happens is we need to be able to understand the effects of the funding formula in order to properly get rid of the situation that we see in the Commonwealth of this funding disparity from different locations. So what I would encourage everybody to be aware of is that this term funding formula is an integral part of the property tax elimination bill because of the financial losses that are gathering steam due to the efforts to provide some degree of stability to school districts that have been losing population. Under the Act 35 of 2016, they believe it will take up to 20 years to fully incorporate the state funding formula. That's why you have a lot of people in the city of Philadelphia, Candley, Lancaster, Reading, and other areas say that they should get a higher portion of the current funding formula to make up for this problem with this funding formula concept. So when I'm doing my property tax elimination bill, it's really important that I have to keep this new and old funding formula in the process to make sure that we don't shortchange or, in fact, one way or another, penalize a school district based upon the ability to eliminate school property taxes. One final point that I want to bring up. This is pretty complicated. One of the items that I would encourage everybody to be aware of is that any property tax bill that's done has got to be able to reflect the fact that we're building on a very, very weak foundation from a budgetary perspective. We have the old funding formula, the new funding formula. We have the basic education funding formula, the special education funding formula. We have all the other issues with either failing schools or schools that are excessively producing better results than expected. So this property tax bill that I'm working on right now has got to deal with these problems with the funding formula, because if we don't, what will happen is it will reduce the likelihood the bill that will pass. And second of all, I've got to make certain that I'm accommodating the needs of the old funding formula or the new funding formula, or I will never get the number of votes we need to bring this to fruition. I wanted you to be aware of the funding formula for a couple of reasons. One is I want you to see the level of complexity of what we're dealing with. And our property tax elimination bill at this point is already at over 290 pages to accommodate many of the issues that we're dealing with in terms of the equality of the funding relief in the different areas of the schools. When we look at property tax elimination, we need to make certain that we know who benefits and who doesn't benefit, so that we can make sure that the children who are receiving the education are taken care of, the teachers are fairly treated, the property owners are able to deal with the situations of being able to own their home and not be only one life event from losing their home. And then finally, and I think equally as importantly, people who are workers, who are trying to make ends meet, or don't have this entire burden of a property tax shifted on them with the unintended consequences of not knowing all the nuances of how our system operates in the Commonwealth, such as with the funding formula. So thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, reach out to me at repfrankryan.com, or my email address is fryan@pahousegop.com. Thanks so much for listening today.